over at phillyvoice.com, Ryan Lawrence writes about Rhys Hoskins, and he joins us now to talk a little bit more about the incredible start by number 17. What's going on, pal?
Not much. Sorry, my radio was on in my car. I just got in my car.
Sir, turn your radio down.
I'm officially on the Rhys Hoskins beat now, you know?
That's it. There's no Phillies beat. It's just follow this man around, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's what everybody wants, and why not? I mean, the show he's been putting on in the last month, it's like, thank God for this, right? Yeah. Those of us that have watched this team on a day-in and day-out basis for the last 3 years, you know, we've been waiting for something like this. Something fun to talk about and to write about.
It really is. And like, you know, like I said, my dad asked, he's like, I never heard about this guy. Like, how come, you know, now we've heard about him because we're in the circles, but like, if you're just a casual fan watching regular games, like he said, look, I heard of Crawford, I heard of Nick Williams, I knew about Jorge Alfaro. He's like, but I feel like this guy wasn't in the same category as them.
I don't know, man. You need to read philliesvoice.com more often. I read about this guy a lot last year. He had 38 home runs last year at AA.
Well, I think like you might have been – he certainly had the numbers, Ryan, the last couple of years. But wouldn't you say he wasn't regarded as the same level of prospect as those guys?
Yeah, I mean, I think, Crawford was a former first-round pick. So, you know, those guys are always kind of held to a different standard. And you know, you look at the publications like Baseball America, Baseball Prospectus, and yeah, Crawford was the, no doubt about it, number one prospect in the organization for, I think, 3 years. Hoskins wasn't as highly ranked. And I think that happens a lot of time with first basemen because – I think there's a mindset that, you know, they could be a dime a dozen and, you know, it's a pretty easy position to fill. And there are a lot of guys in the minor leagues that can put up home run numbers from that position. But, you know, is it real? Is it not? Because we've seen that a lot. But, yeah, he was a fifth-round pick and from a smaller school, too. So I think that probably had a little bit to do with it, too, where he wasn't, you know, rated quite as high. But ever since he got into the minor league system, you know, all he did was produce. And so I think if you talk to people in Philly circles, they were always high on him. And like I said, since the beginning of last year, really, when him and Dylan Cousins kind of took over the Eastern League in AA, you know, he has been highly thought of. But that's why I kind of tell people, you know, beginning of the season, if you're trying to look at the 2017 Phillies, instead of just going to Citizens Bank Park every day, take a trip to Allentown, take a trip to Lakewood, because you know, that's kind of where the future was, more so than the Citizens Bank Park. So, yeah, I mean, those are the fans that kind of have looked at the system as a whole and not just the major league team. I think they knew about Rhys Hoskins.
Ryan Lawrence with us, phillyvoice.com. And, Ryan, you've got a piece up, When Aliens Attack, about Rhys Hoskins and what he's doing. What was something that really jumped out at you about Hoskins toward start?
I think that the stat that I wanted to look up, and I finally was able to find it about 24 hours ago, was when was the last time a guy led a team in home runs for a season and didn't hit a home run for that team until August? Because that could very well happen right now. And, yeah, you could say that also doesn't really reflect well on the Phillies as a whole because their home run leader right now is Tommy Joseph with 21. But I don't think the Red Sox had a lot of home runs either. And granted, you can get production in a lot of different ways. I'm not saying that the Red Sox are a bad team. But, yeah, I mean, he has a very real possibility of doing that, in part because Tommy Joseph doesn't play anymore. Michael Franco is the only other guy he has to pass, and Franco has 20 home runs. So, yeah, I mean, he has 18 now. Only needs 3, and at the rate he's going with 16 games played or 16 games left in the schedule, feels like it could happen. And yeah, the last time that happened, by the way, was with the Phillies. Mark Whitten of the 1995 Phillies tied. Now, he didn't have the sole lead. He tied for the team lead with Greg Jeffries and Charlie Hayes with 11 home runs. How unwatchable was the 95 Phillies team if the leader had 11 home runs?
By the way, that's 2 days in a row Greg Jeffries' name has been mentioned on this show. How about that, PT? There's a stat for you.
That's a pattern. Hard-hitting Whitten and Greg Jeffries.
There you go.
Hey, Ryan, what kind of kid is Rhys Hoskins? Because we all saw last night, I certainly saw last night, the entire team is up on the top step watching him at bat. Pete Mackanin's had a fun approach talking about him every which way and then saying that he asked for his autograph. You're around him daily. How is he taking all of this?
He's taking it very well. And, you know, he's been bombarded, obviously, as anyone is when they're going through a stretch like this, by media. I think the last homestand, every national media person that you could imagine had tracked him down at some point and did an interview with him, and, it was daily. So that could wear a guy out. But no, he's taking it very well. He has a really good attitude. He understands this isn't going to last in terms of the home run binge. Like, eventually it's going to slow down. But yeah, I can't really speak to enough about his character and just the kind of guy he is. And just an example, I mean, again, I've talked to this kid since he was down in Double-A last year. But there was another columnist in the city who was down at spring training, and he just, out of the blue, said to me, man, that kid really handles himself well, is composed, is mature. He said, he just said that Rhys Hoskins really impressed him. And so that, and that was in spring training before, he's done what he's done. So, so he's kind of the total package. Not only is he producing on the field, but he's a really good guy. So he's easy to root for.
What makes you, Ryan, or scouts around baseball think that this guy isn't a Kevin Moss or a flash in the pan and that he has staying power? What is it about Rhys Hoskins that people have seen so far, both you and scouts, that make you think that you can believe in him, that he's for real?
I would say two things. I would say one is that, this didn't come out of nowhere. It's not like, he wasn't producing in the minor leagues and all of a sudden he's producing. He's been doing this since, I think, basically since he got to Lakewood. He signed out of college, I think 2014 draft. Yeah, I think that's right. And, so his numbers have been there for 3-4 minor league years. So again, the production has been there, and then that just leads you to believe that he's a guy that can produce. And then the other thing to me is just his uncanny plate discipline. I mean, I think his walks and strikeouts are pretty close, and you don't see that very often. I mean, that's like, I don't want to say Joey Votto stuff because I don't want to compare him to anybody and say that that's who he's going to be, but that's a special breed of power hitter when you're not just mashing. You're not. I mean, he's going to strike out a lot, as power hitters do, but he's going to walk too. He can spit on a pitch if it's just out of the strike zone. He's not going to give away at bats very often. So yeah, that to me, the maturity that he has from the plate discipline standpoint and the selectivity he has. J.P. Crawford's another guy that has that skill set, and the Phillies have been dying for guys that have that skill set in this lineup for a few years now. So that's a good sign, and so that leads me to believe that he's not going to be a guy that hits 18 home runs in a 34-game stretch or whatever it is, but he's going to be a guy that I think is going to be a productive middle of the lineup cog for this team for the next decade. I think that from what he's shown, it's hard to think that won't happen.
Ryan Lawrence covers the Phillies, PhillyVoice.com. So watching him and seeing what the Phillies have here, has that changed maybe your expectations of where this team could be, next year or the year after?
Yeah, and before I answer that, I just want to add to the last question that, Dominic Brown was the guy who had a power binge, but if you remember, during Dominic Brown's power binge, he wasn't walking a lot at all. I think maybe had like one walk, but anyway, it just gets back to the fact that I think Hoskins has more staying power. But yeah, the other question, I mean, I've always been bullish on the future of this team because, again, I've been down in the minor leagues and, I don't travel as much with the major league team, and that allows me to go to Lakewood and to go to Reading and to go to Allentown, and I've seen these kids. And, yeah, I'm not saying they're going to contend for a wild card spot next year. I think that is probably a little aggressive, but I think going into that following year, I think next year they can be competitive in the second half, especially if they do some things this offseason. But yeah, I think they're a lot closer than a lot of people believe. And I think part of that, too, is they're sitting on a payroll that there's only one guy that has a guaranteed contract next year, and that's Odubel Herrera. The rest of these guys are pre-arbitration or arbitration eligible, and, so they're not making a ton of money. So this is a team that can go out and spend, and they're a big market team that's with an ownership that has showed that they will spend. It was only, 4 years ago, they were one of the top 5 payrolls in baseball. I think one of the top 2 or top 3, actually. So to me, if a couple of these prospects prosper, like Hoskins, like Crawford, and you have these other guys like Herrera, even Cesar Hernandez, who I know a lot of people are ready to get rid of, so Scott Kingery can come up, but don't sleep on Cesar Hernandez. He's been pretty good for this team. But what I'm saying is you have a few pieces there. Then you go and you add a legitimate middle-of-the-order type bat to complement Hoskins through free agency, not this year but next year when you have all those guys that are free agents like Manny Machado and Josh Donaldson and Bryce Harper and Andrew McCutcheon. And then, you need pitching too. So I think that if it's all up to Matt Klentak, he just has to kind of complement what he has here and do it at the right time. But I think it's very possible because they're going to have money to spend, and they do have some excess of players. I mean, we know right now that middle infield is crowded. So if you take one of those middle infielders and you combine them with another prospect and then a couple pitching prospects lower, you might be able to trade for a pitcher this winter, and then all of a sudden you have a guy to go to next to Aaron Nola, and I think they can get close for contention.
Well, that's an interesting point you bring up, Ryan, because they got a lot of young players now that are around the diamond. I mean, Hoskins is pretty much locked into first now. You've got the J.P. Crawford, Galvis, Hernandez kind of triangle in the middle. Then you got Crawford and Franco, so you got two young players there. You got the young outfield that's kind of locked in, and Alfaro. If they were to go out in free agency, what area of this young team would they like to maybe upgrade?
I mean, pitching, no doubt about it, pitching. Really, there's Aaron Nola, the only guy you can hang your head on. But to your other point, if you're talking about the diamond, we said this kind of last year too, or in other years past too, where you can look around and you're like, okay, well, we haven't given up on this guy yet or that guy yet or this guy yet, so look, the infield's pretty locked in. I mean, last year Tommy Joseph had a pretty good year, and they were, going to give him another year, as they should as a young team. Then, Franco, still young, they wanted to give him another year. And like you said, you're locked in with some outfielders. But it doesn't mean that all those guys are going to definitely be here. I mean, again, you can make trades. I would be hesitant to say that outfield is completely locked in because, you do have some outfielders in the minor leagues too. And again, that free agent class is coming up and there's some pretty good outfielders there too. So, you also have to consider selling high on guys, and again, you package someone together, you might be able to go get a legitimate young pitcher who's under contract, which to me is the better play than to give a 30-year-old free agent pitcher $200 million, because we all know with older pitchers, they're going to break down at some point. So I think that there are places to upgrade. You just have to think outside of the box, I guess is what I should say, and just be open to all possibilities. Don't be locked in with any one player. Because you never know what you get if you put a guy in a trade offer. I would say that, I don't think there are any untouchables besides Rhys Hoskins.
Yeah.
I just can't, I don't know. I guess if you were in a Mike Trout discussion, then maybe you could talk about Rhys Hoskins. But I would say other than that, you have to consider all possibilities.
Ryan Lawrence, PhillyVoice.com. It was Hoskins and Cousins. The two of those guys were neck and neck and kind of tied together. What do you think about Cousins?
It's funny with him, and the name that comes to mind, and again, I'm not going to say that he's going to follow that trajectory, but it's Aaron Judge. Aaron Judge is a guy with just freakish power. Dylan Cousins is a guy with just freakish power. Aaron Judge in Double-A, I remember seeing him. He was playing at Trenton, and I remember it was right about the time the Phillies were talking about trading Hamels, and, what could they ask for, who could they get? And I said to myself, this is the guy I would seek out. You need a position player that has a tool that you can build around. And, obviously the Yankees weren't in the mix for Hamels at the time, but, that was my thought. And then the next year, Judge struggled a little bit at AAA. And what are we seeing this year? Dylan Cousins struggled a little bit at AAA. I just think when you have that power tool, you don't give up on a guy. And that if it clicks, you could have a monster on your hands. So, was it discouraging the year he had at AAA? Sure. But I think he's only 22 or 23. He's still young. He still has, you can go and play him in AAA all year next year. It's not that big of a deal. That's fine. Let him develop a little bit more. I'm not saying that he's going to be a productive, but I'm saying when you have that ridiculous power tool that he has, a guy that if it could be a 40 home run hitter in the big leagues, you exhaust everything and work. So I think next year will be a big year for him.
Ryan, with the young guys, do the Phillies need to decide if Pete Mackanin is the guy they want around these young players entering next season? It seems just as important a step as every other one in the development of this organization.
Yeah, and I think the young players like playing for Pete. I think Pete has done a pretty good job of shuffling guys around and having difficult conversations with guys saying, hey, look, we need to see player so-and-so in September, so, you're probably not going to get as many at-bats. He's very good with the communication, which, is important. He's not leaving guys out on a limb. If they finish with the worst record in baseball, there is a stigma of that. And then you think the ownership, you really say all bets are off with anybody's job if they finish with the worst record in baseball. I still think that everybody likes Pete and what he does for a young team. Now, when they're ready to contend, is he going to be around? I don't know. But I don't think they were going to be ready to contend next year. So I think that, I think they're fine moving forward into 2018 with Pete Mackanin as the manager.
You give a lot of credit to Matt Stairs for some of these young players and their approach at the plate?
Yeah, sure. I mean, hitting coaches they're a special breed, man. They probably are at the ballpark longer than anybody because they're getting there early. They're looking through tape. If a player wants to come in and hit, they're there for them. They're staying there after games to work with hitters and then look at tape. And this is his passion. This is what he wanted to do. And, actually I thought about this earlier because they're going to have an opening on the radio slot with Larry Anderson, next year going to be kind of a part-time player in the radio booth. And I thought to myself that, Stairs could get back in the broadcast booth where he probably would have more job security because, broadcasters usually are around for a decent amount of time if they're pretty good, whereas hitting coaches are usually the first ones to go when teams go south. But, it's his passion. He wanted to take this job as a hitting coach because he loves it. He loves to talk hitting. He reminds me of Charlie Emanuel that way, just a guy that will sit there and talk hitting with you until you're blue in the face. So, I think you have to give him some credit because he's working with a lot of young guys who are adjusting to the big leagues. And for the most part, a lot of these guys are making pretty good adjustments. Now, you're not going to bat 1,000 there, but I would say that he's done a pretty good job in his first year on the job.
Hey, Rye, we talk a lot about Hoskins. He gets a lot of attention, but there's other younger players that maybe Philly fans should start taking notice of. Nick Williams, Alfaro hit a homer, Crawford. So who are some of the guys that are standing out to you?
I think Nick Williams is funny. I wrote this a couple weeks ago when Hoskins was, in the first of his home run binges, that this guy was going completely under the radar. And with good, obviously for good reason because another guy was having a historic start to his big league career. But, Nick Williams is hitting around 300. I think his OPS is in the 800s. Shown a little bit of power. He's going to strike out. That's always been his thing. But he's even a little bit more disciplined in the big leagues than he was in the minor leagues. That was another thing. In the minor leagues, didn't walk a whole lot. So I've been really impressed. And, we're not talking about a short sample size. He's been in the big leagues now for over 2 months. So he's the guy that jumps out to me that, I've been impressed by just because we weren't sure what he was when the season began because he had an off year at AAA in 2016. So he jumps out. And Crawford, we haven't seen a ton of, but thank you. But, yeah, from what I've seen, defensively, he can handle his own anywhere on the diamond. And, that to me, that increases your options. If you want to go into next year with Freddie Galvis still as your shortstop, and he's a free agent after next year, you could still do that and play, J.P. Crawford at third or at second. So I like Crawford's athleticism. I also like his selectivity at the plate, kind of like I was saying with Hoskins. But, I haven't seen enough offensively to say whether or not I think he's ready full-time for a big league job. But, yeah, so those guys jump out. Alfaro has that crazy power tool, which is fun. He hit that home run about 6,000 feet yesterday. But I think defensively he needs some stuff to work on. But I think he's probably going to do that in the major leagues next year. He has to do it in the major leagues next year because he's out of options. But I could see him in a timeshare, kind of similar to what they did this year with Rupp and Knapp sharing time. I think that Alfaro will be with one of those guys kind of sharing time next year.
Ryan, I want to ask you real quick before we let you roll here. They're playing the A's for an interleague matchup. Henderson Alvarez pitching on Sunday. Interesting story from him. I mean, this is a guy was an all-star back in 2014, vanished, ended up with the Long Island Ducks, and now he'll throw for the first time since 2015 on Sunday.
Yeah, it's a fun story. He's the guy that threw a no-hitter on the last day of the season for the Marlins against the Tigers. I think it was 2014 or 2013, so it wasn't too long ago. But, yeah, he's had 2 different shoulder surgeries, and shoulders are tricky. Shoulders aren't as easy to come back from as elbows. Elbows, Tommy John surgery, and usually you're back. It takes you a little while, but you're back, where shoulders are a little bit more problematic. But, yeah, he's only 27. So he only turned 27 in April, so he's still a young kid that has shown that he can pitch in the big leagues before. And I think this is kind of like a Pat Gillick type thing. And they're doing this all the time with different guys, but this guy obviously stands out a little bit more because he's an all-star that threw a no-hitter. But I think about Pat Gillick and taking a chance on a guy like Jason Worth when he was non-tendered by the Dodgers in 2007, or I think it was the Ed Wade regime that got Shane Victorino in the Rule 5 draft. I mean, even the Phillies got a double Herrera in the Rule 5 draft. So this just goes to show that you don't know always what you're going to – it's not always the obvious move. It's not always signing the big free agents or making the big trades. Sometimes it's the smaller moves like this that'll pay off. And I'm not saying this is going to pay off. He hasn't even thrown a pitch yet for the Phillies. But, you have to take chances like this, and it's obviously a low-risk, high-reward type chance. So, all credit to the Phillies scouting department for taking a chance on him, and they obviously like what they've seen. But, yeah, we'll see someday how he fares.
Ryan Lawrence with us. Of course, he'll be watching the Phillies and the A's over the weekend, but we know you'll be watching Clemson, Louisville, too, as well. Good luck to your Tigers there.
Yeah, actually, I'm off tomorrow night for that reason. I need to watch college football.
I like that.
That's what I like to hear. Priorities.
All right. Ryan Lawrence, PhillyVoice.com. He covers the Phillies, and, of course, read that article on the outer body experience, the aliens attacking Rhys Hoskins. It's at PhillyVoice.com. Thanks, pal. Have a good weekend.
Yeah, you too, guys.